Thank you very much for coming. Yesterday, on June 23rd, during the great Orthodox feast of Pentecost, the Saint Trinity, Kyiv regime, supported by the USA, carried out a heinous attack against civilians in the Russian city of Sebastopol in Crimea. Ukraine launched 5 US-supplied attack-MS missiles armed with cluster munitions. All flight missions were introduced by the US experts based on the US satellite intelligence. An American Global Hawk UAV was patrolling the airspace over the Crimean Peninsula. The beach area, packed with peaceful citizens enjoying their weekend, an Orthodox holiday, was hit. Fire came from the sky on unprotected people who had nowhere to hide. Sand turned into blood. The video footage from the scene is just shocking. 151 persons were injured, among them 27 children. 4 people died, including 2 children. They will never have a chance to enjoy a summer day again. The investigative committee of the Russian Federation has started to investigate this heinous crime. All responsible for this and other terrorist attacks will be held accountable. The fact that the US is directly involved in this crime is beyond any doubt. Washington and its allies foster a neo-Nazi regime in Kyiv and encourage their puppets in Kyiv to commit terrorist acts against civilians. Recently, the NATO countries gave the Kyiv regime a green light to conduct strikes deep into the Russian territory. We are not surprised that the Western media keep silent about this tragedy. The lives of the Russian civilians are of no interest to them. The lack of any meaningful response from the UN Secretariat that is supposed to stand against such obvious crimes and violations of international law is even more regretful. It is a clear example of double standards of the UN Secretariat, who is very eloquent on other occasions. But when it comes to the killings of the Russian civilians, the only reaction of the Secretariat was that they, I quote, want all sides to take steps to avoid civilian casualties, unquote. And that they, I quote, seek an end to the war in line with the UN Charter and JA resolutions, end quote. No condemnation, no regret, not even sympathy. And this is not enough. This is an illustration of bias and hypocrisy of the UN Secretariat trying to shy away from calling a spade, that the crimes committed by the Kyiv regime are inadmissible and that the NATO members are an accomplice in these crimes. I will not go into the origins of this crisis or its genesis. We spoke about it many times during the Security Council briefings, who started what and when. I will just give you a few quotes, how the Secretariat treats what's happening in Ukraine and how it treats what's happening in Russia. January 16, 23rd. Turning to Ukraine, our colleagues on the ground are telling us that the civilians across the country faced a grim weekend, with airstrikes having killed and injured dozens of civilians. Homes, schools, and hospitals were also damaged in different parts of the country. A strike hit a residential building in Dnipro on Saturday evening in one of the deadliest attacks in Ukraine since the start of the Russian invasion last February. Then, the Secretary General condemned this attack, saying that was another example of a suspected violation of the laws of the war. The humanitarian coordinator for Ukraine, Denise Brown, condemned the immense civilian toll of the attack by the Russian Federation armed forces and called for an effective investigation of suspected war crimes and appropriate prosecution of suspects. July 23, 23. In a statement we issued yesterday, the Secretary General strongly condemned the Russian missile attack on Odessa. The Secretary General urges the Russian Federation to immediately cease attacks against cultural property protected by widely ratified international normative instruments. March 22, 24. The Secretary General condemns in the strongest terms today's large-scale missile and drone attacks by the Russian Federation on Ukrainian cities and towns across the country. They are unacceptable and must end immediately. March 10, 24. The UN team knows that Russia's ongoing invasion has caused immense human suffering and widespread devastation. May 23rd, 24. And staying on Ukraine, today in Ukraine, Denise Brown, whom you know, leads the UN's effort in Ukraine, condemned the deadly attacks on Kharkiv city, which follows 2 weeks of attacks on the region. And when it happens in Russia, listen to this, February 15, 24. We have also seen reports of missile strikes on the Russian city of Belgorod. And we reiterate one more time that attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure are prohibited under international humanitarian law, are unacceptable, must stop immediately. April 13, 24. We have no particular details of this, but we've seen the reports. That's about the Palestinian journalists. April 16, 24. The IAEA has a very clear and technical mandate, right? It is one on having to do with nuclear power plants and nuclear energy. The inspectors have a role there. We do not have the forensic capability of reporting on these strikes, nor does the IAEA. We do not have the forensic capability, nor do we have the investigatory mandate of that bit. April 2024, on killing of the Russian NTV station journalist. We stand opposed to all attacks on media, wherever they are. Media need to be free to go about their work without harm done to them or any other hindrance. And finally, June 22, 24 on Sebastopol. We want all sides to take steps to avoid civilian casualties. As always, we see an end to the war in line with the UN Charter and GA resolutions. I hope you notice the difference in the tone and the way the events are being presented by the Secretary. The US ambassador in Moscow was called today to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for a démarche on this abhorrent crime where Washington is directly involved, not only by supplying the missiles, but also fully controlling their flight missions. The strike targeting civilians in Sebastopol will not go unanswered. There will be measures in response. The Russian Federation will continue to protect its people and its national security until no threat is posed by the neo-Nazi regime in Kyiv that was breeded, raised, and financed by the West. 24th June is the mourning day in the city of Sebastopol. We mourn together with the Sebastopol and its people. Our sympathy goes to the families of the victims. We wish a speedy recovery to the injured. I thank you. Yes, Edith.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. The Secretary General has repeatedly accused the Russian Federation of violating the United Nations Charter by invading Ukraine in February 2022. So my question is, how do you respond to that, and how concerned are you that this latest escalation could lead to a much wider conflict, as some analysts have been worrying about?
We've been explaining the reasons why we started the special military operation many times over. And we were saying many times over that the conflict didn't start in February 2022. The conflict started much earlier. It started 2014 with the neo-Nazi coup d'etat in Kyiv, and with Ukraine conducting a so-called anti-terrorist operation against their own population in Donbass. They were shelling Donbass for 8 years without the tacit approval of their Western sponsors. Nobody cared at all what was happening. Finally, when we decided to put an end to it, everybody went out to speak. So as many times as we said, and I will repeat it, we didn't start this war, we came to end it. What regards the potential escalation of the crisis, yes, we hear what is being said in the West. Recent actions by the West when they permitted Kyiv to attack targets inside the Russian territory, their missions, their personnel, including military personnel, that is helping in directing Ukrainians in operating their weapon systems that they supply. These are steps that definitely lead to the escalation. They talk about Russia preparing to invade Western Europe, which is, of course, complete nonsense. So it's not us who is escalating. You know that President Putin came up with an initiative based on the realities that are today on the ground. It was flatly rejected by the Western Ukrainians. But the further the conflict goes, the worse conditions that we offer will be for the Ukrainians. They have to realize it. Them and the West, their sponsors.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you for the briefing. Gabriel Elizondo from Al Jazeera English. Mr. Ambassador, what are you hoping after Sunday's attack will happen at the Security Council? Are you hoping to take something to the Security Council, and what action would you ideally
Even
like to
on the
see?
Sebastopol attack?
Yes, sir.
I think that will be raised during another regular meeting, briefing on Ukraine that will definitely follow in July, like we do every month. You know that our policy is that if our former Western friends request for a meeting, we do reciprocate. But we will not hesitate to speak about what is happening, either done by the Kyiv regime sponsored by the West, or by what they are doing now in the financial area, trying to steal Russian money and give it to Kyiv, which is a complete shame from the countries that proclaim to be the guardians of international law.
I'm waiting for the microphone. So, Ambassador, you particularly mentioned that it's U.S.-supplied weapons that lead to the deaths of 5 civilians. Have you talked to your U.S. counterpart on this, and what do you think of the supply of weapons to Ukraine would do to the whole crisis in Ukraine?
It will definitely not help in ending the crisis. The more weapons they supply, the stronger the response will be. No F-16s will help the Ukrainians like they are hoping for, like all those Leopards, Abrams tanks, and whatever never helped them, because most of them, those that went to the battlefield, remained there forever.
Have you talked to your U.S. counterpart on this issue?
We are talking during the briefings, but I don't think they are receptive. They continue with their own mantras about what is happening without trying to analyze deeper.
What about the accusation from your Western colleagues on the supply of DPRK weapons?
We commented it many times. They never provided any material evidence. They just talk about it.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I have 2 questions. First, about the double standard.
The
Double standard. Do you see the same double standard in Gaza? When one Palestinian attack an Israeli, then they condemn with the strongest term. When a whole population is being obliterated, then they are careful, they express concern. Even the SG today called only for humanitarian ceasefire. He still did not call for full-fledged comprehensive ceasefire.
And that's
Do you see that double standard?
Of course, these are clear double standards which all the world's view and watch live in the Security Council. That for us, that's been obvious, not even with the start of the crisis in Gaza, but with other crises that happened before it as well, Ukraine including.
My second question, do you see that the war in Gaza and the war in Ukraine, is a similar battle, and if the West, US-led hegemony, could come to an end if they lose both battles in Gaza and in Ukraine?
They are similar in the sense that they are both about US hegemony, yes, indeed. But they differ in nature, in genesis, and I wouldn't compare what's happening in the conflict in Ukraine with what's happening in Gaza. As you rightly said, the whole people is being obliterated, and that's clear to everyone who watches it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. I am from Ukrainian news agency.
I know.
We know that the purpose of the special military operation is killing, raping, and pillage. Do you think, does Russia succeed in fulfilling these aims?
That's for you to consider. Let's see where the front is regarding raping, killing, abducting, which is another favorite theme from our Western and Ukrainian colleagues. You know, this is not just a war on the battlefield. This is mainly an information war. And this war, of course, the West and Ukraine is winning so far with the help of the West. But you have to recognize that we do not deliberately target any civilian infrastructure in Ukraine. Only that infrastructure that relates to the military-industrial complex of Ukraine. We do not bomb cities. We do not bomb civilians. So that's it. We are not doing what Israel is doing in Gaza.
The U.S. announcing this afternoon they're going to send another
I
want to get your reaction to the U.S. announcing they're going to send another $150 million worth of munitions to Ukraine to fight Russia. Could I get your reaction to that?
If I've correctly understood you, you're asking me about the reaction to another tranche of assistance that goes to Ukraine, right? Correct?
The U.S. is sending more money for munitions to Ukraine. I want to get your reaction to that. The U.S. is sending $150 million more in munitions to Ukraine to help fight Russia. What is your reaction to that?
The reaction was always similar. As many as they sent, that won't help it on the battlefield. And it is being proved by what is happening on the ground. You see it yourself. Thank you very much. We'll go to the non-proliferation.